we are super excited to have everyone here today for this first episode of the Next Gen series, as well as the kickoff to our programming in 2023. So thank you, everyone, for being here. We are so excited to be welcoming Carmel Pratt and Zoe Kaufman, both as presenters today at the first Next Gen, as well as the co-hosts of this Next Gen series. It's going to be a great year. And we're also, after the presentation, we're going to have an opportunity to get into some breakout rooms and to ask for feedback and ideas about what you would like to see from this series in the coming year. This is, I mentioned in the video that this is the second Wednesday of the month. So that every second Wednesday of the month, we'll be doing the Next Gen series, looking at how the next generation of practitioners is shaping the future of building. The third week will be Project Showcase. The fourth Wednesday will be Construction Tech. And then the first Wednesday, which will happen, the first one of these will be on February 1st. So coming up in a couple weeks, we'll be kicking off our 101 series. And the host of the 101 series will be Jose Sosa, who wears many hats, including a project manager hat at Bright Power in New York City. He's actually based in London. So he is going to be today's guest host, because Carmel and Zoe are going to be busy as presenters today. Super excited about this new 101 series and to have Jose join us today. Jose, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Zach. I am definitely excited to be part of the team of the Passive House Accelerator, and a happy new year to everyone. As you mentioned, it's evening out here, so I guess that gets a little confusing. People start getting to be used to it for me being here. I am honored to have been offered the opportunity to be hosting the Passive House 101 with you guys at the Accelerator. And I am expecting it to be a great platform for everyone that is looking to learn about building science and also to get familiar with Passive House construction. I am definitely excited to hear from Zoe and Carmel, which, it's now a dear colleague, and I am also honored about that piece. And super excited about the work we're doing with Bright Power. So I encourage you all to join and engage with us in this conversation after the presentations. And I would like to introduce then Carmel Pratt from Bright Power. Carmel is a servant leader and building science professional with a passion for sustainability and innovative strategies that improve the built environment and provide healthy, durable, and equitable spaces. Her decade-long career has been driven by the desire to spread sustainable culture through design, education, consultancy, advocacy, and shared resources on a local and global level. She currently leads the team of professionals, me included, providing commissioning and building performance certification at Bright Power. And she's leading the nation in large-scale enterprise green community projects and also Passive House certified affordable housing projects. And I would also like to welcome Zoe Kaufman from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Zoe's background ranges from design, field testing, and analysis of net zero manufactured homes to consulting and verification for multifamily Passive House buildings. Zoe is now a researcher at the National Renewable Energy Lab in Golden, Colorado, where she focuses on building decarbonization, durability, and resiliency through novel building technologies, building science, field experimentation, moisture modeling, and developing methodology for building performance evaluation. So, it's a pretty good resume for both of them, and I look forward to hear and see their presentation. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks so much, Jose. Great to be here with all of you. And I'm going to kick it off. First, I'd like to just kind of give a background and intention to the format of this presentation that Zoe and I are giving. Funnily enough, our careers have overlapped at many different points across the past few years. And so we're going to be giving you sort of a timeline, not just of our careers, but of the industry in the last decade or so, and some key highlights that have moved the Passive House movement and adjacent movements along the way. My road to Passive House has been an interesting one, and the intention here is also to remind everyone that the road to Passive House is windy and different for every practitioner and and every person that's involved in this great community. But I'm going to start my timeline in 2013. This is where I really started to get the value of learning boots on the ground and understanding where the rubber hits the road from, an architectural and kind of design background to really being on site, installing insulation, doing air sealing, and leading teams of volunteers at Habitat for Humanity in Paterson, New Jersey. This is where I got my start in doing Energy Star certified homes. At the time, Habitat for Humanity in Paterson, New Jersey was a developer that recognized the benefit and the value of certifying homes to a greater standard than code, not only for a energy standpoint, but from a health and durability standpoint. And at the same time, we saw a landscape in New York City that was also changing and recognizing those benefits. So during this time, New York City Housing and Preservation Department, HPD, was requiring enterprise green community certification as part of their financing scheme. So we're really starting to see more of an uptake of green building standards as a baseline, compliance requirement. And this was just generally a fun time. I got to lead some projects doing at-home gardening programs for some of the Habitat homeowners, and of course, building some great houses in New Jersey. Fast forward to 2015 or so, and a good chunk of time that I spent at Stephen Winter Associates. This was, the kind of next step in my career of starting to get into the landscape of codes and standards and certification programs. Picked up a couple of certifications myself and really dove deep into learning, thanks to a lot of my colleagues at Stephen Winter Associates and a lot of you all, the industry at large. We were all kind of learning together. So I became a HERS rater and a lead green rater, Passive House verifier, and really started to work on that NYC landscape of enterprise green communities, Energy Star, Passive House. And this is, again, where we're starting to see a change in policy. But in this time frame, and I'm sure as most of you are aware, Passive House was still considered a kind of niche and small scale program. And the standard was applied really to a lot of single family homes. The real game changer, I'll say, in that time frame was in 2017. I got the honor of working on the house at Cornell Tech project, which was the largest Passive House certified building in the world at the time. And I had the fun and pleasure of doing the whole building blower door test out. And shout out to Kevin Brennan, who a lot of you know from PHA Live. Yes, he was also on site helping us do that test out and figuring out how the hell we do this. And I have a picture here of our blower door shroud with 2 fans in it. Turns out you can test a 26-story building with 1 blower door if you do it really well. So that was a great experience. That's me driving the TechLog software, and what you don't see behind the scenes is having to climb up 26 floors up and down to run cables and tubes and all sorts of fun stuff to help set that up. At the same time, I was going in the opposite kind of end of the spectrum and extreme of Passive House. And I started to design and build my own tiny house to try to show this kind of scale of approach and building design on a very small and very economical level. So in the center there, you can see me. I had a crew of friends helping me at the time. You can see some continuous exterior insulation poking out at the edge there. You don't see that much on tiny homes or RVs. This is a tiny house on wheels. Also at the same time, I joined the New York Passive House, which is a great grassroots movement local to our landscape. And this is the time when they did the Icebox Challenge. And what this did was it brought Passive House to the streets. It brought Passive House to people that don't know anything about building technology, but really started to get it out there and get an understanding. And we keep seeing a drive in policy and demand. In 2019, and excitingly, the first time that Zoe and I got to overlap in our careers, we were both working at the Levy Partnership and also assisting System Buildings Research Alliance, which the Levy Partnership managed. And that firm had both a focus on manufactured homes, which Jose mentioned in Zoe's bio, but also had a focus on passive house, and actually was able to work on the first passive house in New York State that was led by Barlas Wedlick Architects. Barlas Wedlick Architects moved on to do passive house at scale and with affordability for the Columbia County Habitat for Humanity. So coming back a little bit full circle to Habitat for Humanity here, but this is another habitat that recognized the value in building sustainable homes. You all might have seen the webinar that Dennis Wedlick gave on this project, but the Rural Build was a great example of a project that was used as later research to show the benefits of passive house. At the same time, we had the great local law 97 of New York City come into effect. And so building practitioners and building owners and a lot of people are starting to get worried in a good way about their carbon emissions of their buildings. And we see this as driving policy across the board in all of our energy and green building standards. So we're really seeing a uptick in passive house, both of these projects. And I'll note that if you see a cross tool sign, that indicates a project where Zoe and I actually worked on together or overlapped, maybe even not at the same time, because these projects take a while. So we've handed off a few projects between us. On the right, you see a passive house in Washington Heights here in New York City, mid-rise building. This was early, larger scale multifamily passive house application where we still thought we needed 8 inches of insulation, for example. We were still figuring out how to overcome thermal bridges at parapets and how we not only design and construct these buildings, but how we verify them. In 2020, I made a shift myself to Bright Power. Ironically, didn't overlap with Zoe there, although we both have worked at Bright Power, but we overlapped on projects. So this is the era of what I call massive passive, where Bright Power is really working at scale and helping bring to life these huge multi-building and mid and high-rise passive house affordable housing projects. On the left, we have a project called Vital Brookdale, which was an interesting one, both from challenges of, I have a detail there of a roof parapet and figuring out how to overcome the thermal bridge effects of 100 or so anchors and connections for a solar pergola on the roof, and what that does to the overall envelope performance. On the flip side, and in the photo that's right on top of that, you can see that we're starting to figure out 4 inches of insulation is enough on these type of building densities. Envelope first approach is still there, but you're seeing that a lot of the internal loads are starting to balance the overall passive house criteria targets. On the right is a smattering of buildings. And shout out to, I think I saw Sarah Beyer on the call, who her and I have been working on the DeKalb Commons project for a long time. And this is where we're starting to actually focus on embodied carbon and looking at fossil fuel elimination with the NYC Local 154 with the gas ban. So with that, we'll both end on a kind of looking at the future. And I think this will be a thread and a theme along the year as we talk about the next gen of passive house. What I see as a starting point is really focusing on embodied carbon. We're already starting to see that shift, but including that deeply into codes and standards and policy, the same way that we saw worked well for passive house and operational carbon, bringing the cost of passive house down so that it is 0 above code minimum. And that's done by this continued repeat process of developers and designers and everybody getting more and more experience so that this becomes easy, second nature. It's not, it doesn't have to come at a learning curve. And on the flip side of that, and Jose is a thought leader in this side, I will say, is really creating the demand from the tenant and building user side, right? They know what passive house is and they're requiring it. And our tenants in affordable housing are wanting it and asking developers for it. More excitedly, I think, is the future of the current students and folks that are studying about passive house before they're even entering the workforce, and really seeing passive house start from an academic level very early on. And on the left there, we just see the square footage of passive house just exponentially exploding over the last couple of years. I just want to end with a big thank you to all of the people, past, present, and future, that have gone along this journey with us in learning and teaching each other and knowledge sharing. My colleagues at Stephen Winter Associates, my colleagues at the Levy Partnership, Zoe and all my former bosses, the present, project partners that we work with and figure things out with. And like I said, again, the future of the students and friends of Passive House that are going to continue this momentum. I will hand it over to Zoe now.
Thanks, Carmel. And for all the shout outs. I think before everyone goes crazy, you should probably talk about your background while I get my screen set up.
My background, educational,
No, your literal background right now, which is too amazing not to say something about.
Yeah, I hope it wasn't too distracting. I wish I could say that this was my office view, but I just happen to be on-site, off-site today, and with a killer background that you'll never see again, but can enjoy for the day.
Okay, so now I'll go through kind of my journey up to this point. The journey continues. And we'll also point out where Carmel and I overlap with that same symbol. Carmel, hopefully the projects that you have inherited from me have all been in a good place, because I know that can be frustrating if it's not, but hopefully I left them in good shape. All right, so my timeline starts with a master's in sustainable design at Carnegie Mellon, where I was able to learn quite a bit that would prepare me for sustainable design consulting or high performance building. One of these experiences in particular was the Race to Zero, which is now the Solar Decathlon Design Challenge. And it was just this great experience to understand what it means to design kind of all of the details of what high performance actually looks like. And it was Passive House inspired. This is me and one of my teammates, Tim, receiving I think it was a grand finalist award for the Race to Zero back in 2015. My first job was in New York City at the Levy Partnership, and got to have a lot of very different experiences there, from energy auditing to designing disaster relief housing for FEMA to both FIAS and PHI consulting. So I do want to emphasize this manufactured homes experience that I got to have. So this building in the center is the first or second zero energy ready manufactured home. And it was sited in New Jersey, was built in Pennsylvania. And I got to be a part of kind of all of its building, which was this really cool experience to understand how these homes are built, what the details are like, what might need to be changed for zero energy ready in particular. So this was kind of my first boots on the ground type experience. And I think both Carmel and I wanted to emphasize that our boots on the ground experiences, they really helped shape us and our interest in this realm, and kind of helped us understand what it takes to really build to high performance rather than have something on paper. So this was the factory build, and I wanted to highlight a couple of details. So on the left, we have Owens Corning teaching the builders a little bit about window flashing, and you can also see that all of the seams in the insulation board are taped, and they're actually rolling it on with the roller so that it's properly adhered, and we have a good air barrier there. In the middle, we have some high density blown cellulose or dense packed. And then on the right is kind of an example of a makeshift solution to how do you seal a sprinkler pipe that is above your air barrier in the factory. So we made kind of a box made with foam for like the sprinkler head, and then sealed it to the ceiling, as well as sealing the pipe to the box. So then there are details being looked at on site as well. So there's, things happen in the factory and it continues to site. So one of these things was we were experimenting with installing mini split heat pumps in the factory. Usually the mechanical systems are installed on site. And the ducting is installed in the factory, but the mechanical systems are installed on site. But this one we were testing, how does it do on the road traveling? And this one did just fine. So that was exciting. In the middle, you're seeing what we call the marriage line between the two sides of like the two halves of a manufactured home. So they travel on the road with a certain width, and then you can put them together on site. And this black line is that gasket here that helps seal them together. And then on the right, we have the hinge roof system, and we were checking for if the insulation had been displaced at all during travel, and it had a little bit. But anyway, this was a very cool experience for me. And it was also, this home ended up being a test home for looking at the effectiveness of point source space conditioning. And Carmel actually did a repeat of this in Climate Zone 6 later. So then on to other real site experiences that I got to have. Finally, I got to delve into Passive House, similar to how Carmel got to delve into Passive House because I left Levy Partnership. My colleague, Purnamasi Roth, bequeathed me a few Passive House projects. So I was in no way primarily responsible for these, but definitely got some experience with consulting and being on site for all of these. So anything from a brownstone retrofit to the Habitat Columbia County Passive House that I think Carmel talked about, to low-rise multifamily. So we were kind of trying to figure that out at that moment. And then I transitioned to Bright Power, where I was doing that sort of massive passive movement. So it was a very cool time to be in this space. I think especially at Bright Power, where the emphasis is already on affordable multifamily, because housing preservation and development was preferring very high performance building. Any proposals that included Passive House or high performance were generally preferred and got funded. I think this is still the case. They get funded. So it meant that we were not only getting to do a lot of Passive House and other high performance, also getting to affect people hopefully positively in affordable housing. Another interesting part of the backdrop was at some point while I was there, National Grid was threatening its gas moratorium. So people were all of a sudden starting to take electrification really seriously a little bit before we thought this would have to happen. And so, kind of understand how to electrify single family, but centralized systems, especially water heating in multifamily, was kind of an experiment. So it was really cool to be sitting in on these engineering conversations of how do we do heat pump water heaters in multifamily centralized. And then finally, Carmel already talked about Local Law 97, but for anyone not familiar, it requires lower buildings emissions over time. And you get a fine if you do not, if you're not below certain emissions thresholds. And so Passive House is kind of this insurance policy against having to pay fines. And we were seeing that kind of in the decision making at the time. So it was a very cool place to be. I will note that that WFI model over on the right was that DeKalb Commons building that Carmel also shared. It was exciting also in that we're seeing a lot of like certified products spring up and kind of figuring out all together as a community, like how to detail large Passive House. So I have a few examples of some details. At the very top left is the answer to the question of if you're in New York City and you can't spare an inch and you want to build right up against the building right next to you, how do you insulate and air seal this wall that's going to be built there? So the answer, which I think I am not credited for, but I was on site and took that photo, they put the insulation boards up against the wall. He's kind of fitted it with the rebar, and then they're casting in place concrete as the air barrier. And then below that, just showing how you need to be really meticulous with the fire stopping to pass the compartmentalization tests. In the middle is a photo of testing the thickness of the liquid applied air barrier and noting that, really needed to coordinate being on site at the right time to know that everything was being installed properly. And the builders don't necessarily have the verifier in mind when they're building all the time. So just learning to bug the builders and get out there frequently. And then on the right is another one of those passive house details. So insulating over the parapet, the question being, do you insulate over? Do you provide thermal breaks under the parapet where it meets the roof? And I think in this case, they decided to insulate over top. It might have had to do with, well, yes, we're seeing these certified components or components meant for thermal breaks, but are they going to be available at the exact time that's needed for the build? So this was kind of the more like makeshift approach. We know this is going to work, so here we go. Finally, I've ended up in research, and this sort of happened because I was starting to do hygrothermal modeling, which is energy and moisture modeling, for some retrofit projects at Bright Power, and I wanted to just dive deeper into that, which I have gotten to do a little bit at NREL, but also lots of other types of projects. And I would say it looks sort of similar sometimes. Rather than field testing, we call it experimentation. Things are makeshift in a different way. There's generally not a testing protocol for everything that we're doing. For instance, I put a blower door in an attic and figuring out how to create that seal. In the middle is a tracer gas analyzer, very fancy machine, and we're using it to test the natural air changes of this building. So not at 50 pascals, but natural pressure. And we have some CO2 tanks on the right looking at CO2 as a potential viable tracer gas for our purposes. And modeling looks a little bit different too. It might be using the same software, but maybe we're testing out different novel materials, or I was able to do some life cycle carbon emissions assessments. That was very cool. But one really wonderful thing that I get to do is be on the other side of solar decathlon right now, both in the design and the build challenges. And in the build challenge this year, we are starting a passive performance contest, which I'm really excited about, but also nervous because it's the first time we're trying it. So stay tuned. I don't know what's going to happen, but regardless, it's wonderful to see what this next generation of practitioners is doing and seeing as the next things moving forward. So I enjoy being able to support that. What do I think is the future of Passive House? I liked all of what Carmel said, especially with looking at carbon. An experienced workforce is going to be incredibly helpful. I think we need to determine what our retrofits look like by building typology. And then I think we also need to make sure we're building in resilience at the community level so that if we're decarbonizing and if we're electrifying, that we're doing that safely and resiliently. And just considering Passive House as a crucial part of all of these other goals that we have, like grid responsive, higher indoor air quality, reducing the energy burden, et cetera. So now just a thank you to a few of my mentors. They're definitely not all listed here. But first of all, Erica Cochran was the first mentor I ever had in grad school, and she just really taught me what it was like to have a mentor. I had no idea before that. She invested quite a bit in me and taught me things on the spot and just really believed in what I could do. And then Tyler Davis, who I believe is potentially on the call. He doesn't have much of an internet presence, so this is us ice skating together. But he was a coworker and then a manager and also a very good friend, and taught me quite a bit about project management and on-site verification. And then Ed Hancock, in addition to Greg Barker, are part of, they make up Mountain Energy Partnership and have taught me a lot about field experimentation and data analysis. So that's what I'll mention for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Carmel. Thank you, Zoe. That was very, very interesting. I definitely enjoyed seeing your career, and it looks like it's gonna keep going strong. So, you know, I'm really happy to see that. And after your presentations, I was just thinking something, and I just scribbled it here before I forget it. So it seems to me that passive house certification and just learning about building science is the equivalent of being a medical doctor or a CSI kind of person, because, you know, as professionals, we are called to prescribe the best possible way to make the building durable and healthy for people. And on the flip side, we also sometimes get called to figure out where the problem is coming from and why it's happening, and not just say, oh, you have some leak somewhere, without really knowing what's actually happening. So that's something that I guess is super exciting for all of us here.